And hi, everybody. Welcome to FSU Coach Live. My name is Tim Baghurst. I'm joined with a special guest today, Shaun Caven, who's in Australia. Quite a time zone. How is it like tomorrow, Shaun?
Yeah, it's good so far. We're a little bit ahead of you guys, which is a little bit different from where I was in the States before, and now we're behind you.
That's right. We actually met in Oklahoma. You came and spoke in one of my classes, and I've actually never forgot some of what you've said in that class. And I kind of was hoping that you'd share some of that today as well. But before we get into that, maybe just tell everybody a little bit about who you are, kind of how you came through coaching and where you are today.
Yeah, my name's Shaun Caven. I am originally from Scotland, as you can probably tell by the accent. I have been coaching at high level for about 20 odd years. Previously, before that, as a volunteer. So I'm currently the Paralympic coach for Australia, Paddle Australia, where we will be hopefully taking part in Tokyo 21 next year. And I was previously the head coach in Great Britain at junior and senior level. And then I moved to America, where me and Tim met before for 10 years. And I was the head coach in Oklahoma City and a national team coach for the USA.
And so when we talk about coaching paddle, can you describe specifically what you coach? Is it specific disciplines?
Yeah, I coach Paralympic sprint, which is a 200-meter event in individual kayaks. So, and we also race a VA, which is a canoe, which has got a single blade. We race 200 meters only. So it's slightly different from the Olympic discipline, which is as fast as you can go in a straight line, but they race in singles, doubles, and fours over 200, 500, and 1,000 meters. So it's a little bit, the idea is exactly the same, it's just the distance is different. And everything in Paralympic is in single events. There's 3 categories of ability. So the more issues you have, the lower your number is. So KL3 is the most physically able, where KL1 is typically a spinal cord type injury, which means that the athlete can only really use their arms as the method of propulsion.
Right. Okay. And I should mention as well, those of you who are starting to watch and join us, if you have questions for Shaun about anything he's talking about, or you want to know a little bit more, just post it in the chat box, and then it'll come to me, and we can get it to him and have some more discussion. But moving on, how did you get into coaching? Were you an athlete who just kind of migrated into coaching, or did you have this from, I always want to be this kind of coach?
No, I always helped at the Canoe Club, where I was as an assistant, if you like, coach. But I never saw coaching as a real career in the UK, because it was never really until the lottery came along that coaching as a profession was really possible, unless you were in a mainstream sport like football, rugby, etc. So coaching was never really a career path that I would have chosen to make a living from. But I ended up coaching more by default. People just asked me what they thought we should do for a training session, and it kind of progressed to that. And then I started coaching some juniors, and particularly a couple of girls that went on to win like a national championship in the UK at 16 level. And then it kind of snowballed from there, that the lottery timing just came in, it kicked in early 99. And I was appointed as the national team coach for juniors at the end of 2001. So it was almost like a perfect storm of scenarios that came along, and I ended up coaching as a profession, which I never thought. If you'd asked me when I was 20, would I be coaching kayaking as a professional, I would have said no.
Well, we do have a question for you as well from somebody watching, and it's Steve Hebert. Sorry, is there a different training method for each of the different divisions, or do you basically set up the same training program for each athlete or division?
That's a great question. In principle, no, there is no real difference. We just make accommodations for each individual athlete depending on their circumstances. So, and that's you can expand that to a wider question, which is able-bodied versus para athletes, and do they train differently? Yes, they have to in some regard, but the overall principles are the same. So
when you say they train the same in general but different, how do they train that is different?
Well, the differences are in their accommodation for their specific situation. So if somebody has a prosthetic leg, they have to do things slightly differently to somebody that's maybe got a prosthetic on their arm or something like that. So we make accommodations, but the actual principle and the what they're trying to do is essentially the same. In terms of the physiology, it's pretty much the same. Some people do things faster, slower. You know, it's to me, it's no different than what I was doing before with able-bodied, between male and female, or a 14-year-old athlete versus a 28-year-old athlete. You make accommodations depending on the individual. And for me, when I first started coaching para, I was approached by a girl in America to coach her, and I'd never coached a para athlete before. So I just said, here's the deal. We will do everything the same as everybody else. And if there's something you can't do, then we'll make an accommodation to see if we can find a way around that, or we just leave it and carry on doing what we can to make you as fast as possible.
So you kind of, in that situation, learned on the fly. It's not like you went to some kind of training to teach you how to do that.
There is some specific training now, but back then there was nothing really specific towards para canoe available really in the world, because essentially para canoe was introduced by the ICF to the World Championship level in 2009. So it's still relatively new, and it was only adopted by the Paralympics the last time in Rio. Was the first time that canoe kayak was involved, and it was only kayak. This time they've added VA, which is the canoe, because the kayak was such a success in Rio. Everybody loved it. The races were really close. The athletes are really great role models and ambassadors for the sport and sport in general. So they introduced another category, which was the canoe, which essentially gives us another 60 athletes across male and female that can now participate as well. So it's growing quickly, you know, and it is a great sport for para athletes to be able to get on the water. And essentially, if you were just, you know, moving past our training facility, you would be hard pressed to tell at distance who's able-bodied and para athlete.
One of the, I just finished my class online, and one of the discussions was in the era of COVID-19, some sports are definitely more likely to have participation because you're distanced from others. And I've seen on your Facebook profile, for example, where you've kind of shown how you can do this with canoe kayak and these other disciplines. Have you seen greater interest in the disciplines just because of the environment that we're in?
We've noticed on the water when we've been training, and we're in a fortunate position that we can train essentially one athlete, one coach. So we're complying with the recommendations and the rules. And we are fortunate that we can get on the water relatively easily without having to travel too far to get to that point. But I have noticed a significant increase in river traffic with people in canoes, kayaks, surf skis, etc. So whether that will have a spin-off effect in terms of people taking up racing, still to be seen. But there's been a definite uptake in exercise via kayak for sure. Yes.
And so let's go back to your coaching. You were, you know, as you said, originally from Scotland. You moved to the U.S. to coach an individual. You ended up in Oklahoma, which is where you and I connected. Now you're in Australia. That's quite a decision. And what made you make that decision to, you know what, I've been in the U.S. for a long time, I'm going to go on the other side of the world?
It was just the opportunity to travel. My family, Liam, my boy, is 7, so we had an opportunity there to move to a Paralympic program that was highly successful. 4 really good athletes. It's funded by the government, which in the US, unfortunately, it's not. Therefore, it was an opportunity for me to further coaching and continue moving around the planet. So it was an ideal time to try the move, and it's been successful so far. The World Championships last year, we qualified 4 athletes for Tokyo in 6 events, because a couple of the athletes are doubling up between kayak and the canoe. So we've got a really good shot at 6 events, and with the COVID situation, moving the games to 21, it gives us an opportunity to potentially get 1 or 2 more athletes there, because we unfortunately couldn't finish our qualification system. The 4 athletes that have qualified slots right now, those slots are fixed in, but there was an opportunity this year to qualify more people in Europe, but obviously that can't take place right now. So the extra time could potentially give us a couple more athletes to join. So the reason for leaving the UK to go to America was because of an opportunity that came up to use coaching and kayaking as a vehicle to make that happen. And then 10 years later, the same opportunity sprung up in Australia. So I took it, and here we are.
But again, reiterating, I mean, this was never your plan, and here you are making a living from something you love to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's great because, you know, the old adage, if you're doing something you love, you don't feel like you're working. So I think that's the same with virtually every coach in the program is that when they're doing something they love doing, they don't feel like you're at work in the typical 9-to-5 job. No disrespect to anybody that works in an office, but when your office is a canal or a lake, then it's significantly different in terms of your outlook and how you can get some physical exercise as well, and make a living doing it, and hopefully passing on your knowledge to some other athletes who can then do the same again.
What would your typical day look like? I mean, you said getting on the water. If I asked you for a typical training day, what would that look like for you?
Typical training day is 1, 2, or 3 sessions early in the morning. Typically, I coach one-on-one with the athletes, so I will either be in the motorboat beside them, or mainly paddle in the morning, and then in the afternoon we'll do either gym 3 days a week, or an additional paddle in the afternoon. The afternoon paddle typically is a little bit shorter and a little bit more specific in terms of speed or intensity. So that's generally a typical day. Training twice a day, 5-6 days a week, and typically we do 3 weeks on and 1 week as sort of recovery stroke, less intensity on a rolling basis.
Okay. Well, we have another question as well, again from Steve, and he says the athletes, this is a good question as well. The athletes that were ready for the Olympics, how are you changing your coaching? And I'm assuming kind of your periodization, your plan for the extra year for those who were peaking for this year.
That's a really good question, because this is a bizarre, unprecedented situation. So we're still evolving a new plan as we speak. So essentially, what we're doing now is in Australia, we're in the fortunate position that we had our 3 or 4 domestic events, which are normal, culminating in our national championships at the end of March. So we had our domestic season done and dusted, and then we were going into a period of training for Duisburg in Germany, which was the Paralympic World Championships stroke global qualification regatta. And then we would have gone into training for Tokyo itself in September. So essentially what we're going to do is just keep ticking over in terms of training, have a break, probably late June, early July, and then be ready to start 1st of September to build up the season. Probably just exactly the same as we would have done, but we'll start on the 1st of September, say, which gives us a little bit more time than we would normally have, because normally we finish the 3rd or 4th week in August, and then we have a month's break, so we can get a little bit ahead. But yeah, this is a bizarre situation. So I think every coach in the world is probably thinking exactly the same thing. Some of the guys have taken a break right now, and are just doing general fitness training because there's no other competitions they can do in any other sport or discipline. So they're just kind of ticking over, keeping fit, keeping healthy, really. And then most people, I think, will start back later on in the year and do a typical build-up. Being in Australia has changed some of the things that I'm able to do because the weather is conducive to paddling all year round, which means that we don't really have like what I would call a European or a North American type winter, where you're forced inside because of the weather conditions. So that allows you to be a little bit more flexible and do.
That's a big advantage for your athletes being able to train like that.
It is a big advantage, and that's why a lot of countries come to Australia in the winter or the Northern Hemisphere winter to train here because of that. Exactly that point. So it is a big advantage, and having the domestic season during the European winter for us here is a big advantage too, because it allows us to kind of benchmark and see where we are in a real competition really early on in the year. So provided you don't put too much pressure on those events, then you can use that to your advantage. And there is time between the events, so it's not like a massive peak and then a big, huge drop off. So it's really a definite advantage, and it's a difference for me. So I've been kind of learning since I came here a year ago exactly how to try and maximise that advantage for over a European or a Northern Hemisphere winter.
We have another question in a minute, but I want to get on to more like the challenges that you face as a coach, because everybody, all the coaches that we've interviewed so far, talk about different challenges that they face. What about you? What kind of challenges do you face in your sport and based on your experiences?
I think the challenges for canoe and kayak have always been that we struggle to get high quality athletes because those athletes are drawn towards the higher profile sports where the money is, and they make millions of dollars. So if that's more relevant probably in America, where your athletes are going to football, particularly. That was a big problem in definitely in Oklahoma, where football is king, followed closely by basketball. So you lose a lot of people to that. And then the other big issue, particularly in the US, was that if the sport wasn't a scholarship level, it was almost impossible to get parents to commit to that sport, even though the sport would be good for their son or daughter. If it wasn't sponsored by a university, then and via scholarship, then they weren't interested. So that was a problem. But in Australia here, we get a lot of athletes coming from surf lifesaving for the able-bodied team, and then for para, we've just kind of fell on our feet and been lucky. So that's an area that's a major concern for us right now, is that we need to find more athletes, which is difficult because you've got a limited population already.
Right.
And they are also then attracted by the higher profile Paralympic sports like basketball, wheelchair rugby, which we've started to reach out to those other sports too, to see if we can get some help. And we got one boy who started in Perth, Western Australia, who was in the under-23 basketball team, still is, but he's trying his hand at kayaking as well, just to see if we can develop him as well. And in the fullness of time, he can decide in the future whether he wants to pursue kayaking or basketball. But right now, he's at an age where he's not going to make the senior basketball team quite now. So trying kayaking was a no-brainer for him. So the extra year in his case is great. So the challenges that I face on a daily basis are trying to find more athletes. And then once we find them, it's then getting them up to a level that they can then compete. Does take a long time. Particularly with para, it's more one-on-one coaching, depending on each individual's athlete needs. So if the athletes typically got paralysis from, say, the hips down, then they need a lot more help than somebody who doesn't, in terms of getting on and off the water. Once they're on the water, it tends to be less of an issue. It's just the getting off and access, and then access to equipment is another issue that we are trying to solve here right now, and we're in a pretty good situation in terms of equipment. We got probably more equipment than athletes, so it's a double-edged sword. We're trying to find more coaches that are interested in helping para-athletes, and then we're trying to find more athletes themselves. And it's just like an awareness campaign. It's people being aware that the sport's there, it is accessible, and you don't necessarily need to go to the Paralympics. It's just that you can try, and hopefully they might bring a few friends with them if they don't actually make it to that level themselves. But the initial start point is just an awareness campaign. So we're trying physical therapy studios, hospital clinics, word of mouth through the Paralympic organisations between different sports. If somebody's not going to quite make it in one sport, why not try kayaking, or vice versa? If somebody's not going to make it in kayaking, try basketball, try something. It's a much healthier option than just sitting and doing nothing.
So another question that came in, and Steve, I'll get back to yours, but Jim Douglas said that physical periodization schemes are proven effective for the body, and we've already talked a little bit about how you do that. Do your athletes incorporate any mental strengthening that could be based off a periodization schedule? I guess the idea being the minds need rest and change too, correct?
Yes. It's important that we try and change things up a little bit, and we currently work with team psychologist who's just come on board with para, and we're particularly looking at performance improvements in the mental state, and we've got a lot of support now, like probably every sport has got now, where mental health is probably more important than the physical stuff right now, just with a lot of stuff that's going on, and awareness really around mental health. We've all been as staff to mental health first aid clinics, which helped us understand a lot more about the subject, even though there's not a lot as staff we can do other than do our job to the best of our ability. And then we try and change things up a little bit so that the mind is still active. So we're looking at different methods of training, different times a year. It's hard for our athletes sometimes to go to different places because of access, etc. But we try and change it up as much as possible. And we're in a fortunate position when Europe is open that we have a really great training facility and right in the North Italy, which is kind of the epicenter for Europe right now. But once that clears up and we can get back there, then it's a fantastic location, and it definitely is a change from Australia in a positive way. So we do appreciate that a change is as good as a rest, and mental health is really, really important. I mean, I think every sport now has got a mental health and well-being manager or advisor, and we certainly have somebody in place to do that. At a number of levels. So we've got somebody in our performance department, we've got somebody nationally working on those things, and Paralympic Australia has probably got a whole department available for that particular subject. And it's important too that it's not just for the athletes, it's for the coaches as well, and support staff, because everybody's part of the same team. So
and that's a good point. And I want to segue into that, because you talked about it's important for coaches and professionals who are working with these athletes to be mentally well.
Yeah.
Stress in para sports? Do you experience any of that? Do you feel pressure to perform and all of these other things? And if so, what do you do about it? How do you deal with it?
There is pressure to perform, regardless of the sport. I don't think it's different between para or able bods. I think it's just the same kind of pressure, and a lot of the pressure is internal anyway, and it comes
You put
from
pressure on yourself.
Yeah, you put pressure on yourself. You put pressure
Mm-hmm.
on your team and the athletes. The internal pressure that they have is probably what drives them on a daily basis. So I think that's probably a greater pressure than the external pressure to perform.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people are in admiration of the athletes, and they probably don't actually mind whether they win or not. But the athletes obviously want to win,
Sure.
because these athletes are seen as, like in the community, are seen as winners regardless of their actual performance, whether you get a medal on any given day or not. They're really great role models, but the internal pressure on them to perform is high by themselves, and then obviously that spins off onto the coach. But for me, in terms of stress, yeah, there is stress, stress of traveling, stress of being away from your family, etc. When your son's 7, so you want to spend more time with him, etc. So, but with modern technology like this, you can chat virtually, and you can be there. So that definitely helps a lot than when I first started, where it was like one phone call a week or something. So it's easier to keep in contact. But in terms of stress relief, I mean, my stress relief is just paddling with the athletes, or cycling. I go out cycling with a couple of colleagues every week. So that's kind of my stress relief is physical activity, changing up the environment, and then you change the people that you're around, so as that you're not just talking about canoe, kayak, para sport all day, every day.
So getting away from the sport itself.
It's not, because it's actually the reverse. It's getting away from it in a healthy way. So you're trying to create distance so that when you come back, you're more refreshed and able to go at it full tilt, rather than tired and exhausted and stressed.
Yeah, another good question, Steve. Is there more or less pressure when the government is sponsoring versus external sponsors? Do you have both? Do you have external sponsors?
We have some limited external sponsors, yes.
Okay.
And there is a government sponsorship. I think the pressure's probably the same in terms of the overall outcome, but
there is pressure there, right? I mean, your government.
There is pressure because your funding's based on your medal count. So
right.
The more medals you get, the more funding you're likely to get. Then that sustains your program. Yes, so there is a pressure there. Yeah, and the external sponsors, because canoe kayak is much smaller than, say, basketball or football, then the sponsorship dollar amount is not as high. But the expectation on the person who's sponsoring is still there, but the pressure's not quite the same as maybe a high-profile athlete.
Sure.
Like, let's say LeBron James is probably under significant more pressure than we are from an external sponsor. But in terms of the government sponsorship here in Australia, means that we're in the fortunate position that we get sponsored to do what we're doing, but there is pressure to perform and win medals. And fortunately for canoe kayak in Australia, both the Olympic team, slalom, sprint, and Paralympic, has produced medals probably every game since '92, and even before. So we are a sport that does provide medals on a quadrennial basis. So that puts you in a different situation than a sport who's struggling to do that.
Yeah. I want to go back to when you spoke in my class a couple of years ago. You said something that has really stuck with me, and it was this. It was you told us, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a couple of years, or maybe you don't remember, but that you are quite happy to share your training programs with people because ultimately the success of your athletes depends on the relationship that you have with them.
Yeah, I mean, the training program itself is just a list of things to do on a piece of paper. So it only comes to life when the coach and the athlete have a discussion, and you then do that. Because, for example, if you had 6 times 500 meters on a training program on a piece of paper, there's an infinite number of ways you can do that. And depending on the day, the time of year, the weather, there's so many factors. How the athlete feels that morning. If they don't feel like doing it, then there's no point. So we change things up and move things around. And so there's a planning element to coaching, but there's also the athlete coach relationship where you can see that athlete X is not ready for this session today, so let's change it and do something else. Or maybe he says he's not ready, but he actually is, and he just needs a little bit of encouragement and pushed. So there's infinite number of ways you can do it. So our training program itself only really comes to life between the athlete and the coach. And how you do that and how you apply yourself to each session can have a marked difference to the physical and mental outcome of that session. So it's really, really important that that relationship's there and everybody's got a clear understanding of what the goal of the session is, what the point of the session is, and then the overall goal at the end of the year is to be as fast as possible on the 3 days or 4 days of the competition. So
how do you then get to know your athletes and know when you need to say something to push them, or even some tell them to back off because they're just going to push until they hurt themselves?
It takes time to develop a relationship, and it comes out of trust, that the athlete trusts that you're there for their benefit and you've got their best interests at heart. And that can take a long time to develop, especially in the situation that I came into. I came into a team of people that were already established. They were all working with coaches already. So to come in and then start telling people what to do is probably not the best idea. So it just takes a little bit of time to get that trust.
So did you do anything specific to kind of build that trust?
No, I mean, I think you've just got to be yourself and sort of tell them what you're going to do, why you're doing it, and over time just let things evolve slowly, and let them definitely have an input into what they're doing, especially if they're, let's say, mature athletes who have already got an Olympic or Paralympic campaign under their belt. Clearly that they can obviously do the sport at a high level, so they have an input into what they do on a daily basis, and I think that's really important as well. If I was brought here to coach a bunch of 14-year-olds, it would have been a different story. It would have been more about me telling them what to do and directing them rather than encouragement and discussion. So there's a definite difference between the two situations there. So
well, I think you made a couple of good points, and one is that they need to understand why you're doing what you're doing, as opposed to just do it because I told you, and also allowing the athlete to have input so that you respect that they have an opinion and they have experiences that you may not have as well.
Yeah, I mean, we did a session yesterday that 2 of the athletes had never actually done before. They understood what the reasons were, why we were doing the session. And it was just a little experiment to see if they enjoyed doing it, and they did. So we can incorporate that a little bit more and adapt it as we go along. So it does take time. There's not really that much you can do in terms of canoe kayak to make it particularly different, because you have to get in a kayak, you have to get on the water, you have to have a paddle in your hand. So these are how things, but how you work around those things is infinite. In terms of the type of training you do, when you do it, how fast you do it, how hard you do it, and then the recovery period in between, how much gym is involved. All these things are factors that you can manipulate as the year goes on, just to keep changing it over. But I think it's important that as a coach, you kind of sit down with your athlete on a regular basis and discuss where they are now, and where they've been and where they want to go. And then a lot of the stuff we've done in the last couple of weeks has been evidence-based towards looking back at where, when we thought Tokyo 20 was going to go ahead, we were looking at details in terms of, okay, at the national championships, which is basically the same weekend every year for the last X amount of years, this was the time and this was the speed that you did. Now, there is variation, weather, etc., but overall, the indication was that everybody was in a much better place than they'd been before. So that evidence-based coaching is important to remind people where they were before, and the progress and the work that you've done has helped you improve. So if you can show that you're on track, I think then the athletes trust what you're doing is working, and then they're more willing to move forward with you. So it's an ongoing, never-ending discussion, and it's just an evolving a relationship between you and your athlete. And as that gets stronger, you probably actually end up saying less as time goes on than more.
Because they know, you've taught them.
Because they know, yeah. And they understand what my little hieroglyphics mean on a sheet of paper or on a spreadsheet. And so then you actually end up having less discussion than maybe more, until you bring in something new, and then you can have that new discussion again.
Okay. Well, and just a reminder, if you have a question, to post it in the chat box, and we'll try to get it to Shaun. As we're kind of nearing the end of my questions, one of the ones I have is, you've been coaching for many years now, and you've been coaching in a very unique sport, and also a para sport. And that's provided you with some experiences and perspectives that maybe most coaches or people interested in becoming coaches will never get. If you're looking to share some kind of wisdom and advice for people who wanted to get into the coaching career or want to improve as coaches, what recommendations do you have?
If you speak selfishly as an athlete, if you're a young athlete and you can help coach at your club or organization in any capacity on any sport, then the skills that you'll learn as a coach will help you as an athlete as well. So if you're a young athlete, learning to coach or helping coaching will give you that perspective. Now with funding being available in most sports, then coaching as a career is viable. So it's something you can definitely look at moving forward. And for me, the benefits in coaching are that, I've got contacts all around the world. I've traveled the world coaching and being at competitions, and I've got to see a lot of things that there is no way I'd ever seen otherwise. And then the people, particularly that I've met along the way, are generally awesome, and they keep in contact via social media, etc., on a regular basis. And I just saw some pictures being posted on Facebook the other day. People are sticking up memories that they've got, and there's pictures there that I've never seen before from ex-colleagues, etc. So it's pretty amazing, and it's a definite career doing something that hopefully you love doing, and if you love doing it, you can continue to do it, albeit slightly adjusted, but you can still continue to participate in the sport. Fortunately, kayaking is not like some sports where age is a definite barrier. You can still participate, a lot slower, but you can still participate, and you can do something you love. And I think irrespective of your actual performance, if you show that you love doing it, then people will respect that, and they'll want to be part of it, and then they'll want to help and do what they can to promote the sport. And I think that's where kayaking is a unique sport, in that it allows people to participate way longer than. There's no way that you could play basketball at my age at any kind of level that would allow you to even get on the court with your athletes. It's not going to happen. So kayaking does allow you to do that a little bit, and it allows you to travel the world and be a coach in a sport that you love. So I highly recommend coaching to anybody that wanted to get involved in it. You don't need to know everything before you start. You kind of learn as you go, and I definitely had to, because in some cases I was the first of the first to do stuff. So there's no playbook, there's no rule book, there's no manual. More and more of that stuff is available now, but like we said right at the start, when I started coaching para, there was no para book, or there wasn't even a chapter in a book. So now it's definitely more of an established discipline. There's more and more information about how you can get involved and what you can do, etc. there already, so that you don't have to make the same potential mistakes, or the learning curve is much steeper.
And if somebody, maybe they're watching this later, not live, and wants to get in touch with you and has some questions, wants to follow up about Paralympic sports and coaching in general, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Just email at shaun.caven.paddle.org.au, which is on the screen now. If you contact me there, then we can get in touch via whatever method then works, depending on your time zone and the planet, really.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Shaun, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us and kind of share your experiences. Very much do appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. No problem. Thank you.